So I'm thinking about our dilemma, we have longings. Some of you have, expressed those longings in the introductions. And we have to deal with the conditions, whatever conditions we find ourselves in, right? Whether it's weather event or, flat tire or getting sick, or we have to deal with those conditions. And all of those conditions contain both constraints and possibilities. Certain things we can't do because of the conditions, and certain things that are possible, that open up as possibilities. And we all, I think, share an aspiration to live a good life, right? Whatever definition you might apply to that. So the paramitas, which are what we will be studying this week, are the teachings of the Buddha that are sometimes called the practices of perfection. I don't use that term so much because so many people have kind of reactive sense of perfectionism being something bad or dangerous or something they're trying to get over or something that's problematic in some way. So I don't think of this in terms of practices of perfection, but more, it's like having some kind of aspiration for a perfect outcome, right? Perfection that's without flaw. I think of them instead as perfect practices. That is, these are perfect practices, and you can practice them anytime and anywhere. These 6 perfect practices are the practices of generosity, morality, patience, vigor, concentration or meditation, as it's sometimes written, and wisdom. And so they're taught as a training program. The Buddha taught that we should cultivate them. I think this is perfect because, first of all, these are qualities that are inherent. They're not something that you have to take on. It's something already in you. You already have these qualities within you. And that they contribute to the welfare of yourself and other people. They're liberating, they're wise, they're relational. So there's none of them you could do just all on your own. What does it even mean to be moral if you're not in some kind of a situation, right, with other people? They're admirable, so we generally admire people who show these qualities. They're contributing to social harmony. So in places where this is a commonly shared quality, we see that there's a kind of social harmony there. So I think it's interesting to me, I've always thought of these as complementary to the precepts, which we talked about in the ceremony this morning. The precepts give us a sense of what a disciple of the Buddha refrains from doing. They refrain from harming, they refrain from stealing, they refrain from ill will. These are things we refrain from. But the paramitas are things we actively cultivate and qualities that we can train. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of, first I'm going to read you a poem that's about, that sort of speaks to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. It's called Magpies Recognize Themselves in the Mirror. It's by Kelly Russell Agaddon. The night sounds like a murder of magpies, and we're replacing our cabinet knobs because we can't change the world, but we can change our hardware. America breaks my heart some days, and some days it breaks itself in two. I watched a woman have a breakdown in the mall today, and when the security guard tried to help her, what I could see was all of us peeking from her purse as she threw it across the floor into Forever 21. And yes, the walls felt like another way to hold us in, and when she finally stopped crying, I heard her say to the fluorescent lighting, "Some days the sky is too bright." And like that, we were her flock in our black coats and white sweaters. Some of us reaching our wings to her, and some of us flying away. So, where do these paramitas come from? These are found throughout the Mahayana Sutras. So I'm going to give you a little taste of Dale Wright, who has the premier book on the paramitas called The Six Perfections. He says the most frequently named group of perfections is the 6 perfections found throughout the early Mahayana sutras. One sutra introduces the 6 perfections by having a disciple ask the Buddha, how many bases for training are there for those seeking enlightenment? The Buddha responds, there are 6: generosity, morality, tolerance, energy, meditation, and wisdom. The sutra claims that the 6 perfections are bases for training. This means that they constitute a series of practices or trainings that guide Buddhist practitioners toward the goal of enlightenment or awakening. These 6 trainings are the means or methods to that all-important end. But the perfections are much more than techniques. They are also the most fundamental dimension of the goal of enlightenment. Enlightenment is defined in terms of these 6 qualities of human character. Together, they constitute the essential qualities of that ideal human state. There's an important sense in which almost everyone has a thought of enlightenment. That is, some idea of the good. We all imagine better lives than what we have managed so far. Better ways to do what we are doing, better relationships with others, better character, and so on. For most people, though, this idea or thought is underdeveloped and immature. It has not been systematically cultivated to become the driving force behind deliberate change. More a daydream than a well-honed understanding, an immature thought of enlightenment will have little capacity to guide a life and very little power to shape deliberations on how we might best live our lives. Worthy ideals are not the products of fantasy. If we take as our thought of enlightenment some flatteringly divine image, that image will be unable to guide us in shaping our lives because it is out of accord with the reality of our situation. An authentic thought of enlightenment would be one that fits our actual possibilities and that can be revised as our situation in life changes. It would be a conception of an ideal for our lives that accords with possibilities that are both really our own and truly ideal. So, we take a kind of scientific approach to Zen in which we consider it's important to do little experiments, to collect the data, understand how to experiment in our own lives to make discoveries. So we have this central sense of inquiry as at the heart of what we're about. And then the experiment, results, and then we look at what happens to us internally, what happens externally with others and out in the world, what happens to our relationships, and what happens to our communities when we embrace these qualities. And what we discover is they produce little hits of joy. And those little hits of joy begin to take root. So I like metaphors, I'm a language idiot. So I like to use metaphors, and the metaphors around this, the paramitas, I think of 4 metaphors. One is cultivation. So we cultivate these qualities like a plant growing in a garden, and we're providing good conditions for its growth, removing weeds and things that interfere with it. The second metaphor is training, which means attentive practice to develop a skillful performance. So that means necessarily we might not be all that skillful. We might be kind of awkward, early in our training, and then it becomes more and more natural, more and more refined. The third metaphor is discovery. It's like science. So we question things with an open mind, and we observe and we experiment. We take this scientific approach. What are we really observing? What's really happening? And then the fourth metaphor that I use is the metaphor of exploration. So this means opening new territory. As we practice these paramitas, as we practice these 6 qualities, we are opening up a whole new landscape for ourselves, right? A whole new territory to discover. What does this mean? How does this play out? And we're learning its contours and its landscapes. What is this like? So that means that we need the capacity for tending, that's the cultivation part, For effort, that's the practice and training part, right? We may have to make an effort, and that effort has to be an informed effort. And then for discovery, we need curiosity, right? We have to keep an open mind. We have to be curious about what might happen. And then for exploration, opening new territory and exploring new territory, we need some courage. It's all unfamiliar. We don't know what's going to happen, right? And so those are the things that I think accompany those sort of metaphors that I use for describing how we approach these paramitas. Is that making sense to you? It is? Okay. So consequently, what we're about is really mastery, right? Which is a result of mindful practice, observation of self and others in situations where you observe that other people are exhibiting those qualities. For example, there's a good example of someone being generous, there's a good example of someone being patient. And then there's a kind of appreciation. This is something I want to be doing. I really appreciate what's happening as a result of this practice. And it also means, mastery also means persistence. Like, you can't get really good at something unless you're willing to persist at it. I used to say you can't really become expert at anything unless you're willing to suck at it for a really long time. It doesn't matter whether it's watercolor or calligraphy or the law, right? You have to be in the beginning kind of an idiot. You don't know what you're doing, and you're just trying to apply whatever you think you know. So our everyday question that's driving this, what I would call this urge for mastery, is our question: what is this life about? This life, this one I got, this particular life, what is it about? What are we doing here? So it's about how to be a person. So, okay, that's the next poem, being a person. That's this one. Being a person. This is by William Stafford, who's one of my all-time favorite poets. I love his poetry. Be a person here. Stand by the river. Invoke the owls. Invoke winter, then spring. Let any season that wants to come here make its own call. After that sound goes away, wait. A slow bubble rises through the earth and begins to include sky, stars, all space, even the outracing, expanding thought. Come back and hear the little sound again. Suddenly, this dream you are having matches everyone's dream, and the result is the world. If a different call came, there wouldn't be any world, or you, or the river, or the owls calling. How you stand here is important. How you listen for the next things to happen. How you breathe. So, this is also a part of the general ethical framework for Buddhism. The precepts are one part, and the paramitas are another part of and Buddhism does have an ethical framework, despite the fact that a lot of people think that Zen is about just doing whatever you feel. So Dale Wright says, the Buddhist teachings on the 6 perfections imply a kind of ethics that focuses directly on daily life. Instead of a set of principles to help solve occasional moral quandaries, ethics of this sort permeates everyday activity. Its actions are an integral part of what we do from moment to moment. In this sense, the 6 perfections are less like a set of principles or rules and more like a system of training. A good analogy for this would be training in physical fitness. Practicing the 6 perfections, one engages in training to become more generous, moral, tolerant, energetic, meditative, and wise. To train, one must practice on a regular basis, shaping one's life around the various aspects of the training regimen. Just as a physical training program would prepare you to engage in an athletic event, an ethical training program, like the 6 perfections, trains practitioners to engage in these basic dimensions of life in deeper and more enlightening ways. So I think that's kind of a good way to think about it. So this kind of training and practice is a direct expression of the care that we often talk about here, mindful care, of appamada. So how we express these qualities is unique to us. Each person is going to have their own way of expressing it. And we begin to deepen as we practice, become more sophisticated in our understanding of what that really means. So there's a kind of a naive level of each of these, naive level of generosity, just give some people some money. And there's a deepening then that happens where it becomes more and more and more intelligent, more and more wise. Now I'm actually looking someone in the eye and seeing what is it that they actually need? What is it that I have to offer? And it's just this deepening and deepening and deepening. Each of these qualities has an unwise version. So it's possible, and Delray talks about this in his book, that there are times when you don't want to be generous because it is not good for the person. That generous intention is actually going to cause harm. Or when it's not wise to be patient. It's not wise to be patient when someone else is being harmed, right? So there's a wisdom that's shot through all of them. It's the sixth of the paramitas, but it's actually significant in every single one of them. It's got to permeate every single one of them. Yes, it's great to have vigor. It's great to have energy and vitality, but if you're headed in the wrong direction, that's not going to actually be a good idea, So this is why we have to be more and more discerning as we practice. We discover, oh, yeah. And that's the training program. Mostly training by mistake is how we do it. So there's a caution around the paramitas. And one of the reasons it's not commonly taught is that people have a tendency to turn it into a self-improvement project, like we do with so much of our lives, right? I'm going to be a really good person. I'm going to make myself into a better person. So Dale Wright says, one common criticism in our time to the entire topic of self-cultivation is the critical point that the extent of focus on the self that self-cultivation implies is itself inappropriate, even delusory, and that it fails to acknowledge the more fundamental communal or social dimension of life, right? Just so busy improving yourself that it completely ignores this social dimension. This is an important point, and one that Buddhists have faced as directly and as responsibly as anyone in other traditions. The overall Buddhist response to this critique entails two primary points. This is really important to get. I was really surprised when I read this because I had been thinking about this, focus on the self, focus on the self. It's just making a better self, which is more problematic. So, first and most important, Buddhists maintain that the beneficiary of your practice of self-cultivation is not just but others around you, and ultimately the whole of humanity. So if you become a more generous person, it's not just benefiting you, right? It's benefiting everyone around you. Early in the career of Mahayana Buddhists who are serious about practicing the perfections, a vow is taken, the Bodhisattva vow, in which practitioners vow to seek enlightenment, not just for themselves, but on behalf of everyone equally. It is the whole of society that needs to be enlightened, not just certain individuals, even if individuals are the catalyst through which such enlightenment becomes a reality. In effect, the vow is just to seek enlightenment at whatever level and to whatever degree that can be accomplished, and not be possessive about it. Enlightenment not simply for oneself, but on behalf of a greater vision for everyone and everything. That's what that vow is. The second point follows from the first. And this is so critical, I think. We have no choice but to begin the quest wherever we happen to be. If, like most people, we attend primarily to our own well-being, then our interest in enlightenment or the six perfections or anything else extends only so far as the good we think it will do for us as individuals. If the range of our interest and concern does not extend far beyond our own lives, then that is where we must begin. Imagining the perfections and enlightenment as beneficial for ourselves, which of course they are. Nevertheless, each of the 6 perfections functions as a system of training to overcome the narrow and myopic sense of self that we all have in immature stages of development. As we progress through the perfections, even if we began for essentially selfish reasons, the practices themselves undermine that sense of self, gradually showing us its superficiality and opening us to a more comprehensive vision. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we have to start where we are. The general criticism of self-cultivation as being too individualistic fails to recognize that we are unable to be of service to others until we have undergone enough self-transformation to begin to see the larger realities beyond the importance of our own well-being. So most of us start with some, project of self-improvement in mind. That's how we begin, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not where we're going to stay, right? Gradually, we become aware there are other people. I always think this is so funny because we have people come and sit, and primarily they're coming to sit to relieve their own pain or anxiety or fear or dread or whatever, or to get better at something like being calm, lowering their blood pressure or whatever. And they come in with, whatever views they have about what they think they're trying to do in meditation. And so it's very instrumental. Meditation is going to help them do something, right? And it's going to help them do something that improves themselves. That's a perfect place to start. As you sit, that's going to gradually become softer. And the next thing that happens, and this is almost inevitable, is people begin to be aware that there are people sitting near them. There are other people there, which is, it's sort of a wake-up call, like, oh, you're here. Okay, you were here yesterday. It's like that. And then there's a point where they're like, hey, how are you? How are you doing? It becomes a little bit more personal, the connections that you have. And you start to be thinking beyond your own sphere, and you start thinking, wow, these people are all doing this, we're all doing this together. And they're all getting, whatever, they're all getting better at it than me because I'm still struggling. So there's this kind of awareness that, oh, there are people around, and then there becomes a still larger awareness, which is, these are all people I enjoy connecting with, and I kind of like being around them. There's a sense, there's kind of a community here, and it's sort of like, you can see this kind of dawning awareness, like, oh, there's a there. And then there's a kind of thing that happens quite often where people are like, I want to be supporting this. I want to be in this. I want this to continue. I want to be part of it. And so to me, it's very interesting because then all of this idea of I'm doing this to get a better self starts to sort of dissolve, and that's exactly what Wright is talking about. So as we go through this week, we're going to take up each day one of these practices of perfection, one of these perfect practices. And one of the things I really hope you discover is that in the practicing of them, you experience the joy that they bring. So one of the things, to me, the canonical example is if you have a kid and you have found the perfect Christmas present for that kid, and that kid is jumping up and down, they're just so happy. What do you feel inside? You feel joy, right? And this is the effect of generosity. Of course, it's your kid and you want your kid to love you and all that, but that's not really why you do it. You do it because it makes them so happy. And so as we practice these, begin to notice whatever feelings you're having inside as you do these little experiments in mindfulness, as you practice with them. For me, these are a source of joy. To be an upright person, a moral person in an immoral world, is to be joyful inside as a form of resistance. It's a form of rebellion. So there's this sense that each of these qualities is resisting some dominant trends in the culture and in the society in ways that protect and preserve the joy that is our birthright. That makes sense. And if I feel like I'm sort of on a rant, I feel this way about this. This is the antidote. I saw this in After 9/11, when I came into the Zendo and I saw Flint hand somebody a chant book, and I was in the middle of this terrible spiral of dread and despair and thinking, where is this cycle of violence ever going to end? It's just ramping up and getting worse and worse. When I saw that, I thought, and there had been like 10 million people had marched in Europe to avoid war with Iraq, and we went straight to war with Iraq, And so I thought, obviously big protests aren't the answer. They're not stopping anything. And then I saw it's in tiny acts of kindness. That is the only way we can subvert those forces. It's not going to be by force or violence on our side. So these practices are subversive because they are not championed by the society as a whole, generally speaking. However, we know that there are people who embody them all over. And so one of the things you'll be doing this week is spotting them, like being a bird watcher, right? You're going to try and see, not only do your own little experiments in mindfulness, but see if you can catch people in the act, And that will be a very interesting practice of its own, because it inspires you and it helps you see, oh, this isn't dead in the world. This is maybe, not quite so well advertised, but it's still happening. And I think of this as like two universes. I had an important vision in an intensive about two universes. One universe, the care universe. And in that universe, people are always expressing care. Care is that's their currency in a way. And so their first thought is, whenever something happens, is, well, who's going to care for that? Or who's going to take care of them? Or what kind of care do they need? Or what care is needed? That's the care universe. The other universe is the survival universe. And it's all about how are we going to survive? And the problem is they don't really understand each other at all. So, for example, when I told my dad I was going to major in poetry at the University of Iowa, he said, but how will you survive? How will you survive? And so there's that whole universe, that's the major dominant question, right? How will you survive? And so we can sometimes get, infected with that survival mentality and forget that we're really actually in the care universe. And the care universe is all about how do we care? How do we care for each other? How do we care for the people who are vulnerable, who are sick? How do we care for the babies? That's the primary concern in the care universe. People in care professions and teaching and nursing, so they're all part of that universe. So you can see there's a big conflict between those two universes. And they're complete, right? But they don't comprehend each other. So when we practice the paramitas, we're expanding, let's say, our territory. And the care universe is expanding. But we're also providing people with a kind of reminder, these things are available, these things are possible. Generosity is possible. Kindness is possible. So anyway, that's it for me, and we're way past our time. We aren't going to have any time for sitting it probably now, because we're going to be doing the refuges in a minute. But I just wanted to say how much it means to me that you are willing to embark on this adventure this week. I feel like we've got to be planting these seeds everywhere we can, making things a little bit better for everyone.